What is Englishness? What does it mean to be English? What counts as English culture? What does English identity actually mean? If you've ever argued with a left-wing person, you've probably experienced this line of questioning, where they try to deconstruct our very identity, question if we even exist, and undermine the idea of identity itself, particularly for the English people. Well, it's happening again, and it's been in the news. In an interview on Sky News on the 20th of September, the Conservative MP Robert Jenrick argued that English identity is just as important as Scottish and Welsh identity and ought to be celebrated as such. But the interviewer, Matt Barbet, who grew up in Wales and whose surname is common in North Wales, so I presume him to be a Welshman, challenged the MP to define what English identity is.
What do you mean by English identity?
And I think it is incredibly important that just as Scottish and Welsh leaders speak up for their distinct national identities, so do English politicians.
I'm going to interrupt you there, sorry.
Jenrick responded quite rightly that we should be ensuring that we don't lose English identity through mass migration. But he didn't really answer the question of what English identity is. He said correctly that it is the distinct history of our country and that it is the culture of our nation. Both true. But he never used the term ethnicity. The English are an ethnic group. The word nation comes from Latin natio and was originally a synonym for ethnos. Barbet's deconstructionist approach to our ethnic identity comes from a far-left, anti-white ideological toolkit. They ask you to define your ethnic identity, to condense it into a soundbite, and if you give an example of a tangible piece of cultural heritage, whether architecture, music, food, folk dance, whatever, they will give an example of a person who doesn't like that thing, and then they'll ask if that person is English. Their ultimate goal is to undermine the idea that the English exist as a people distinct from any other. In reality, English culture is defined by whatever ethnically English people do. And English ethnicity is determined by heritage. If you descend from the medieval English people and were enculturated among their descendants in England, then you are ethnically and culturally English. Stephen Bush, the immigrant-descended associate editor and columnist at the Financial Times, formerly a writer for The Guardian, commented on this matter on X recently, saying that the English identity is just the default identity of the remaining 84% of British people after you subtract the Scots and the Welsh. Bush himself is of mixed Jewish and coloured ancestry and led the Commission on Racial Inclusivity in the Jewish Community for the Board of Deputies of British Jews. He has pushed for British Jews to be more inclusive of Black and Mizrahi Jews. He said in another tweet that he can trace his ancestry in Britain back for centuries. Presumably he means to the communities of British Jews who arrived in Britain since Cromwell let them back in from 1656 onwards. The oldest synagogue in England wasn't set up until the 18th century. But maybe centuries is a miscalculation by Bush, as his grasp of history evidently isn't very strong. In the same tweet, he claimed that England is not 1,000 years old. However you define it, this is incorrect. England was first united under one crown in 927 AD, which is 1,097 years ago. So England as a nation-state is over 1,000 years old. But England, that is the land of the English people, the ethnic group called English, is much older than that state. It was still England when there were multiple English kingdoms within it. The English were first defined as a native ethnic group in Britain by the Venerable Bede in 731 AD. That's 1,293 years ago. However, their ancestors, the Angles on the continent, are first described by the Roman historian Tacitus, who called them the Angli 1,926 years ago in 98 AD. And we cannot imagine that these people did not exist before the Romans learned about them. Not only do we have these written sources making us one of the most historically well-attested extant ethnic groups on Earth today, with a proven pedigree, which is the envy of many so-called indigenous peoples around the world. But we also have scientific evidence for the history of our ethnic group and its continuity. A study of ancient Anglo-Saxon DNA, published in 2022 by Gretzinger and colleagues, showed that there is significant genetic continuity among the English ethnic group from their inception to the present day. Post-Roman Britain was beset by Germanic invaders from Denmark and Germany in the 5th century. They replaced approximately 80% of the population of the eastern side of Britain, what's now eastern England. And then they spread westwards across the island, mixing with the natives in the process, who themselves adopted the incoming culture. The Britons gave up speaking Celtic and worshipping Jesus, so that they could speak Old English and worship the god Woden instead. The archaeological record includes one man of entirely native Celtic British ancestry who was buried in the context of a high-status pagan Germanic barrow, showing that the natives not only became English, but were able to achieve high status within the Germanic English culture that was coming in. Another ancient pagan barrow, including animal sacrifices, was found at Oakington, just outside Cambridge, and it contained a man who was 60% native British and 40% Germanic invader. And this mix, 60-40, is the exact same as the average Englishman today, even though the term English did not yet exist when the man was buried. The paper estimates that modern English people take between a quarter and half, 25% to 47%, of their ancestry from the Germanic invaders of the 5th century. But these people weren't Anglo-Saxons yet. The terms English and Anglo-Saxon were always synonyms and always referred to us. English is first recorded as a name for us all in 731 by Bede, and Anglo-Saxon comes a bit later when King Alfred the Great, formerly just King of the West Saxons and Wessex, captured the Mercian Anglian territory of London in 886, and so he was then known as Rex Anglo-Saxonum, the King of the Anglo-Saxons. But both terms continued to be used for the next 2 centuries. A 10th century charter of King Eardwig describes him as King of the Anglosu, an abbreviation of Anglo-Saxonum, and King Canute sometimes used the title King of the Anglo-Saxons as recently as the 11th century. After the Normans invaded in the 11th century, they always referred to the natives as Anglais, and in so doing recognized that we have a distinct ethnic identity. So what percentage of our ancestry today comes from the people who referred to themselves as English as early as the 8th century and as Anglo-Saxon as early as the 9th century? Well, a lot more than 40%. Nearly all of it, in fact, except for a bit of French ancestry that came in the Middle Ages. The result is that while we are now only about 40% like the Angles and Saxons and Jutes who arrived in the 5th century, we are almost 100% the same as the Middle and Late Anglo-Saxons who had already assimilated the native population of Britons and who defined us as the ethnic group we are now, the English. We never stopped referring to ourselves as English, but the term Anglo-Saxon had a period where it wasn't very popular during the High Middle Ages. But the word Anglo-Saxon reappears, along with a renewed interest in the early English past, in the mid-16th century. And that was motivated by an awakening Protestant national consciousness seeking to define itself in opposition to the Catholic South. So for the last 500 years, our English identity has repeatedly relied on our Anglo-Saxon origin to define itself. Despite this, even our own right-wing political leaders are afraid to acknowledge our existence as an English ethnic group, while the left only do so every now and then so that they have an excuse to insult and defame us. The term Anglo-Saxon is considered so dangerous that 2 British universities have opted to stop using the term in history and literature courses. In 2023, Cambridge started to tell students in the course formerly titled Anglo-Saxon, Norse and Celtic Studies that Anglo-Saxons did not exist as a distinct ethnic group. In an effort to make the course more anti-racist and to undermine myths of nationalism, they sought to stop using the term as part of its aim to dismantle the basis of the myths of nationalism. In August this year, the University of Nottingham jumped on this bandwagon by removing the term in an effort to, what they say is, decolonise the curriculum. In a course in English history in an English university. Removing the words for the English ethnic group in this context and denying their history isn't decolonization, it's colonization. The entire movement to ban the word Anglo-Saxon was started in 2019 by far-left extremist activists posing as medieval historians, Mary Rambaran-olm and Eric Wade. Olm said in a talk in 2020 that she wants to burn down medieval studies. And in the same year, she appeared on a podcast called Drinking with Historians, where she revealed that she is influenced by the Marxist, Pan-Africanist, post-colonialist, critical theorist, Frantz Fanon. To those young students of medieval England, she recommends starting off with Kim F. Hall, a black feminist and critical race theorist, most of whose work is about early modern history and the slave trade, and none is about Anglo-Saxon England. And she also recommends Margot Hendricks, who is a Marxist professor of literature, also nothing to do with medieval England. Evidently, the flimsy pretense that they care about English history is transparent. Call them what they are. They're communists, motivated by a pure racial hatred of the English people. To quote Olm's hero, Fanon, "He who is reluctant to recognize me opposes me." We must recognize these people as avowed enemies of the English ethnic group, seeking to sever us from our ancient roots and thereby destroy us. Those speaking in defense of our collective interests are treated like terrorists. I have been treated like a terrorist. Our former colonies are writing our heroes out of our history, and the bonds of blood and history that bind us to the diaspora are being denied in all academic institutions. We have no parliament of our own in this country, like the Welsh and Scots do. There are no charities anywhere in the world which serve us as other ethnicities are served. The only charity which was set up to assist disadvantaged English people, the Steadfast Trust, was deregistered in 2015 after a well-funded attack by the mainstream media. Simply being an Englishman and identifying openly as such today is practically a revolutionary act and sets one on a collision path with the great financial and political powers of the world. So be it. I tell you, remain steadfast, remain English. In the words of the people of Sussex, we won't be druv. Keep surviving the jive. I'll see you next time. Are you interested in worshipping the gods of ancient England and Scandinavia, but you're not sure how to do it? Starting Heathenry is a ritual-focused online course which will furnish you with the knowledge and confidence to practice the heathen religion, alone or with others. The course teaches you how to construct heathen prayers for yourself, not according to the established rites of any modern group, but according to what historical sources show. Starting Heathenry assumes you're interested in Germanic paganism, know about the gods and myths, and want to begin practicing this religion, but require guidance on how to do so. It is based on a micro-learning structure, which is proven to improve knowledge retention by up to 80% in students compared to other learning methods. You get more than 5 hours of learning material, bit by bit, as you please. A modern method of learning about an ancient religion. Your path to knowing the gods through ritual starts here.